I'm glad you set your clocks, you're here. Because you got that extra hour, no snoozing on my hour, okay? Well, I'm so glad to see you here. After being together for a week, I feel like I'm talking amongst friends here. This is just terrific. My name is David Wiemers. I was a writer and producer in Hollywood for 30 years. Oh my, those 30 years went by in a hurry. Today I'm going to be giving my lecture on Tales of Hollywood. It's actually my tale of Hollywood. It's the only tale that I actually know deep from inside. So I'm going to be sharing my reminiscences about Hollywood today with you. Very early on, my agent, I was lucky to have a literary agent to represent me. She sat me down for lunch one day and she said, with any luck at all, there were going to be 4 stages to your career. The first stage is, who is David Wiemers? Well, that was the stage that I was in at that point, and that's the toughest stage to be in because you're in Hollywood, but you have no credits to your name. You're trying to get anybody and everybody to read a script that you've written. You're trying to get your foot in that door, but when I was starting out, they wanted Woody Allen. They wanted Neil Simon, who just passed last week. And it was tough for a young guy like myself to get anyone to notice you. Stage 2 then is, we want David Wiemers. Oh, this is the stage that you look forward to. Now the studios have read your script. You've got a few credits behind you, and they are calling your agent, and they want to meet to do lunch. Did I do lunch? Oh, you can tell I did. This is the exciting time. Phone calls are happening. You're meeting with the studio executives. You've got some credits. You're getting under contract now. This is a terrific time. Then you slip into stage 3, which is, we want a younger David Wiemers. Did any of you have any of those kind of stages in your careers as well? I'm afraid ageism is alive and well in Hollywood, and I found that now I was going to meetings and you're not quite as hungry as you used to be. You've got some credits behind you, but you don't want to do everything that's offered to you at this point. Whereas before you would grab anything and everything you could. Now the younger ones are coming up. You've got to watch it. They've got knives. They'll stab you in the back. I remember I went to a few meetings with executives, and the executives kept getting younger and younger. And they would look at my resume, and they would say, oh, that was my dad's favorite show. You wrote that? I would go home that evening, and I would take that off of my resume. And then you finally slip into stage 4, which is, who is David Wiemers? Here I am in stage 4 right now. I'm standing before you about to deliver my eulogy. Please, be kind. Let's go back to stage 1. Who is David Wiemers? Who is that strapping youth? This was me when I was in junior high school. If I could talk to that young man today and give him some advice, I would say, hang on to that hair, kid. Hair today, gone tomorrow, right? Well, I grew up here in Estes Park, Colorado, right outside the Rocky Mountain National Park. Any of you been to Estes Park, Colorado? Oh, look at all those hands. Wonderful. It is an absolutely gorgeous place to grow up, right? But unfortunately, I wasn't like Liza Minnelli or Jane Fonda, Michael Douglas. I didn't have famous parents who could open doors for me in Hollywood. My father was a park ranger at the Rocky Mountain National Park. My mother worked in a restaurant there in Estes Park. So I moved west after I graduated from high school, and I went to San Diego, California, where I attended San Diego State University. Absolutely loved San Diego. It's still sort of where I call my home in my heart right now. I graduated from San Diego State University, and I was so lucky. The day after I graduated, I actually got hired at the only professional equity theater in San Diego at the time. And I was like one of the young people who you see up here on the stage. I was a singer, dancer. We were doing every show possible. What a great opportunity that was for me, because it really whet my appetite, and it was a real learning process. I learned more in those 2 years working at that theater that I did in college all put together. But I had my sights set higher than that. I was very entrepreneurial. So this was back in the 1970s. And remember during the 70s, suddenly we seemed to be out of gas. There were gas shortages like crazy. We didn't have enough water. We didn't have enough electricity. Well, I thought, I think I can sell this message. So I went to the mayor of San Diego, who was Pete Wilson. This was kind of the start of his career as well, and he went on, he became the governor of the state of California. He became a U.S. senator as well. But at this time, he was the mayor, and I approached him and I said, I can sell this message. What I'll do is I'll do it with a spoonful of sugar. I'll do it with songs, dances, musical skits. So the city of San Diego and San Diego Gas and Electric teamed up, and they represented us, and we were the Conservation Corporation. And we sang and danced all over the state of California. We did hundreds of outdoor performances. We were on every television program that was on in California at the time. We did hundreds of radio programs. We were opening acts at the state fairs. We had ourselves a grand time. There I am again. The San Diego Union did an article on us, and they featured this picture in the paper, and that's me in the front there, and they said, David Wiemers, handsome in the image of Mark Spitz. Oh, what's happened to Mark also, right? Well, we had ourselves a grand time. But again, this was a wonderful year that I spent doing this, but my sights had always been set on Hollywood. So I went back to San Diego State University to get my master's degree in writing for television. I started the program. I turned in my very first script. It was just a short script, and the head of the department read my script. Her name was Hope Shaw, and she called me into her office and she said, "Kid, what are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I want to write for television in Hollywood." And she said, "Well, kid, I read your script. I've only had one other student who showed this kind of promise, and his name is Gary David Goldberg, and he's producing the Tony Randall Show. I want you to start writing for the Tony Randall Show." So I did just that. I wrote what is called a speculation script, a spec script, and it was a script to prove that I understood the characters of the Tony Randall Show, that I could plot out a good plot, I could do the comedy, and this was being produced at the time by the Mary Tyler Moore production company. Remember the little kitty cat at the beginning? Well, they were also producing Rhoda, which was on CBS at the time, and the Betty White Show. So I wrote 3 of those scripts, and lo and behold, MTM hired me. I was 24 years old. I moved to Hollywood. Oh, I don't think my head, my ego could fit in this auditorium right now. I was sure that the limousines were going to come and whisk me away. Well, I was halfway through my very first script on the Tony Randall Show when CBS canceled the series. That was my life. Oh my gosh, what was I going to do? I was 24 years old. I had half of a credit to my name. I was living in Hollywood. I had car payments. I had apartment payments. I had bills to pay. What was I going to do? Well, for the next 6 years, I called those my struggle years. I was knocking on every door I could in Hollywood. I would pick up an assignment here and there. It was enough to keep me encouraged, but it wasn't enough to pay all the bills. Yes, I was a waiter who worked on weekends to help pay the rent. But as I look back now, I realize this was actually one of the most colorful chapters of my life. I did a few things that were so outrageous to make money, I've now made a lecture out of it. So you have to come back for that one. It's called The Struggle Years, and it's just about that 6-year period, and you won't believe the outrageous stories that I'll be sharing with you about that period of my life. My big break came then, 6 years later, and this was when Michael Eisner took over the Walt Disney Studios. Now, Michael Eisner at the time had been head of Paramount Studios, but the Walt Disney Studio back in the 80s was a struggling company. Walt had died in the late 60s, and his son-in-law had taken over as the CEO. Ron Miller. But it was a struggling company. They weren't making the feature films that hit the mark like they did when Walt was alive. They didn't have any television production at all, none. They didn't do any animated shows, half-hour television programs at all. They felt that that was beneath them. They were Disney. They only did feature films. If you wanted a half-hour cartoon show, go over to Hanna-Barbera. Well, Michael Eisner had been head of ABC Studios as well, and he thought this was absolutely ridiculous. So he sold 2 television series, and these were half-hour animated programs. One he sold to NBC. It was called The Gummy Bears, and he had some people at Disney to work on that particular show. But the other show that he sold was called The Wuzzles, and that was going to be on CBS, and there was no one to do that. I found myself, I had a couple of animation credits behind me at this point. I was one of 200 writer and producers who were called in to audition for this particular show. Well, at this time, I had teamed up with another writer. His name is Ken Kuntz, and we became a collaborating team, Kuntz and Wiemers. We went to this meeting, but there wasn't a snowball's chance in hell that we were going to get anything. And we listened to the presentation. What they did is they had a pilot episode that had been written. It hadn't been produced yet. It had been written, but they didn't have anything for episode number 2. So we were in there listening to what they thought the Wuzzles was, and we were to come back and pitch episode number 2 to them. Well, I listened to their pitch. I listened to CBS's pitch about this. I walked out of the meeting and I turned to Ken and I said, you know, I don't think Disney knows what this show is. And he said, I don't think CBS knows what this show is. I said, why don't we just come up with what we think the show could be, and we'll pitch that. Because there's not a snowball's chance in hell they're going to give 2 guys who are fledgling like we are, we're not going to get the break. So we came back and we did exactly that. We pitched what we thought the Wuzzles could be. CBS smugly turned to Disney and said, see, I told you that's what the Wuzzles is. And Disney looked at CBS and they said, no, that's what we think the Wuzzles is. So they gave us episode number 2. We were shocked. They gave episode number 3 to another writer. Ken and I were working on our script. By the time we turned it in, CBS was so happy with the script. Disney was so happy with that episode. They took episode number 3 away from that writer, and they gave that to us as well. And by episode number 4, we were down as the only writers and producers, and they said, write the entire series. So if Ken and I go into the history books at all, it's that we were the writers and producers of Disney's very first television animated show, which was The Wuzzles, back in the early 80s. This was fun. Now remember, they had no television department. We were literally building the department as we were trying to get this show written. This was back in the days when computers were just starting, so we were doing escape, transfer, load, trying to learn a computer as well. Anyone remember those dinosaur days with computers? My secretary just screamed at me every day, save on a floppy disk, save on a floppy disk. Remember those? Well, we had fun. We decided to reassemble the old Laugh-In gang. Remember Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In? We decided to bring a lot of them back together. So the voice of Hoppo was Joanne Worley. Oh, she was such a kick to work with. We also brought in Henry Gibson to do the voice of Ellery. Ruth Buzzy, we had several. Here is our little Wuzzles team. That's me in the top right-hand corner there. Henry Gibson is in front of me. That's Alan Oppenheimer beside me there. Joanne Worley. The blonde is Ken Kuntz. The guy in the middle with all the hands on him, that's Stan Freberg. Remember him? And then the guy in the red sweater there, that's Bill Scott. He was an absolute legend in animation. He was the biggest voice. He did all the voices in Hollywood, it seemed like. Remember Rocky and Bullwinkle? He was Bullwinkle. He was also Captain Crunch, Mr. Peabody, you name it, he did the voices for it. Bill was 65 years old. 2 weeks after this picture was taken, he dropped dead of a heart attack. Devastating to us. I turned 65 this year. Don't think that picture doesn't scare me now. I'm feeling pretty good this morning, so I think we'll make it through the lecture. After that, then, we were under contract with Disney, and Disney said, when we were working on the Wuzzles, Disney said, we need more shows. You need more shows. Come up with anything, guys. Come on. So Ken and I took some of the comic books from Carl Barks, and we decided to expand it and make it into a bigger universe, and we created the television program DuckTales. Well, DuckTales went through the roof. It became the most successful television animated show ever. It has now been surpassed by another show called, I think it's called The Simpsons, but we're not here to talk about The Simpsons right now. Well, DuckTales just became this massive hit. We did 136 episodes of it, plus a movie. I'll be talking more about my experiences on DuckTales in a future lecture that we have called The Tales of the Walt Disney Company. This was my voice of Scrooge McDuck, Alan Young. Remember him from Mr. Ed? Wilbur on Mr. Ed? He was just a great guy. What a talent he was. We lost him 2 years ago. He was 96 years old. Alan and I stayed in touch throughout all the years. He was just a wonderful guy. Dearly loved working with Alan Young. And most of my female voices were done by June Foray. June Foray, like Bill Scott, was an absolute legend in animation. She was the voice of everything. If Bill Scott was the voice of Bullwinkle, this is Rocky, right here. For me on DuckTales, she did Magica de Spell, she was Ma Beagle, she did a slew of them. Stayed in touch with June forever and ever, worked with her on many different television programs, and we lost her last summer, days before her 100th birthday. They celebrated her in memoriam at this year's Oscars ceremony. She was just a treasure. Well, with this, I found that with the success of DuckTales, I'm telling you, every studio in Hollywood wanted Ken and myself now. The phone was ringing like crazy. We were getting offers from studios. We went to one meeting at Warner Brothers, and I remember it was very hush-hush. They would tell us a little bit about the project, but not too much. They were kind of interviewing us, testing us out. As I left that particular interview, I turned to Ken and I said, you know, there are only 2 people in Hollywood who are this secretive about the projects that they're doing. So we're either working for Woody Allen or for Steven Spielberg. It was Steven. The project that we ended up working on with him ended up being, they actually split the project in half. Half of it became Looney Tune Babies, which was a lot of fun, another big hit. And then the other half became the movie Space Jam with Michael Jordan. Remember that? So that was the first time. I ended up working with Steven again later in my career on Harry and the Hendersons. He was my executive producer on that one. Well, in 1988, it was a very good year for me, 30 years ago. Can't believe it's back that far already. But I won the Emmy that year for writing and producing Jim Henson's Muppet Babies. Remember the Muppet Babies? Anybody? It was just a great time. I actually had a meeting with Jim Henson 1 week before he passed away. He was 58 years old. He wouldn't take medication. His religion wouldn't allow it, and he died of a flu. It was craziness. Also that year, over the years, then, I was nominated for 5 Emmy nominations. I won this particular time. Also that year, I was nominated for the Humanitas Award. This is the script that the church gives out, and it's for the script that most elevates the human experience. So personally, I was more honored to be nominated for that than I was the Emmy, because it's such a special recognition. Unfortunately, out of the 3 of us who were nominated that year, I didn't win, but guess who I lost to? Gary David Goldberg. I can tell you, Hope Shaw came to the awards presentation, and oh my goodness, was she proud. 2 out of the 3 writers for that were her boys. Oh, she was so proud. Gary won it for an episode from the Tony Randall Show, he went on to Lou Grant. Remember, they made a serious drama out of that from the Mary Tyler Moore Show. From there, he created Family Ties with Michael J. Fox, and that was a huge hit. And he won for an episode of Family Ties. He won the Humanitas Award. After that, he did Spin City with Michael J. Fox again. And then later on, Gary and I worked together on a series in the 90s called American Dreamer. It wasn't a hit, but we had Robert Urich that we worked with on that one, and it was just a pleasure working with Gary. We lost him to brain cancer a few years ago, I'm sad to say. Boy, I'm giving everybody's eulogies up here, aren't I? Well, again, as I told you in my previous lecture, because of all these awards and accolades that I was receiving, I got to have lunch with the president, George H.W. Bush, and I got invited to meet the Pope. I said, wow, for someone who's neither Catholic nor Republican, I'm doing pretty good here. At this particular stage in my time, though, as much as I loved what I was doing, I had a very grand reputation in children's programming, but it's not where my heart was. I started off on the Tony Randall Show, and that's where I'd always wanted to go. I wanted to write situation comedies. I loved the immediacy of television. Movies can take forever and ever and ever to get produced, and I'm just not that patient of a person. I love the immediacy of television. We were producing a show a week. We were working like crazy. I love that kind of intensity. So I was much happier in situation comedies. But again, the studios wanted me for children's programming, but when it came to situation comedies, I was getting that cold shoulder again. So Ken and I had to reinvent ourselves all over again. We were not only producing television shows and children's animation, but we were working beside that to write more spec scripts to prove that we were the guys that they wanted for situation comedies. Fortunately, we wrote 2 that went through the roof again. We suddenly found ourselves the hottest commodity in Hollywood, and it was for an episode of Murphy Brown that we wrote, right here, and also an episode of Roseanne, and that was the original Roseanne. They brought Roseanne back. She's back off again, as you may well know, and now they're bringing back Murphy Brown again. That should be on very soon. It'll be with Candice Bergen again. Evidently, she's got a son who's a broadcaster now. So I'm looking forward to that, although I can tell you, my phone hasn't rung yet. Funny how that happens. In addition to those shows, we also worked on Newhart. Anyone remember Newhart? This was the second Newhart series when he was in the inn in Vermont. I've had a few people come up to me on this cruise and ask if I was the one who came up with that brilliant ending for this particular show where he woke up in bed with Suzanne Plachette from the first Bob Newhart show. I wish I could take credit for it. Maybe I should take credit for it. No, who's going to know the difference? But no, that was Barry Kemp, my boss, who came up with that. And he had written both series. This was a fun show to work on. My director on this was Dick Martin from Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. He was just a kick. But I'm telling you, Bob Newhart ruled the roost on that. He was the final boss. He was a strict guy. I also worked 3 seasons on Coach with Craig T. Nelson. At this point, I was under contract with Universal Studios. Loved working on Coach. As a guy who didn't make the football team, it was so rewarding to go back to my class reunion and say, well, guess who's producing Coach and who's not, huh? At Universal Studios, I also wrote and produced Major Dad with Gerald McCraney. We were 2 seasons with that series. And again, for Steven Spielberg, I did Harry and the Hendersons. Whenever there was a series that had been a hit movie and they wanted to turn it into a television show, Ken and I were the 2 guys that got called constantly. Try to adapt them. So, as I said, people ask me now that I'm retired, do you miss Hollywood? And the truth is, I do. There are things I miss. I miss doing lunch. Yes, I did lunch. It was fun to always hang out with other writers and producers. We'd commiserate, we'd swap stories. One time I was at a lunch with CBS Studios. Ken and I were busy working on our own series at the time, but they were telling us about the lineup that they had for the fall series, and they were very excited about it. They told us about one series in particular, and they mentioned these two guys. I said, do you know who these two guys are who are doing this for us? And we said, no, we really don't. And they said, well, you know, we were talking the other day, and they said, you know, they kind of remind us of younger David and Ken. Just like that, I slipped into stage 3. We want a younger David Wiemers. Oh my goodness. Suddenly we were starting to notice things were changing. You're past the age of 40 now, and Hollywood doesn't want you after the age of 40. It's a very youth-oriented place. But it's crazy because you feel like the more you work, the better your skills are. You're on top of your game, but they want youth. So now we had lunch with Pam Dauber one day. This was after Mork and Mindy had finished. Robin Williams' career just soared after Mork and Mindy, but Pam couldn't get arrested. She was in her early 40s at this point, and she said, please come up with a TV show for me. No one will hire me. I'm on top of my game. My comedic skills are better than they've ever been. Why won't anyone hire me? We worked on a pilot episode for her, but again, shut out. Pam really hasn't worked since Mork and Mindy all these years. She married Mark Harmon, so they're not going hungry. Don't cry too much, but her career was pretty much over after that. We were starting to notice, as I look back on my life and career now, I realize I was part of Hollywood during this big transition in the 80s and 90s in particular, when Hollywood was going from the old boss system where all the studios were privately owned, family run, and now big corporations were buying all the studios. We also only had 3 networks at the time. We had ABC, CBS, and NBC, and suddenly Fox came along. It seemed like it opened the world to us. But now, of course, you've got cable television, and it is spread out all over the place. That just wasn't the way it was during my particular heyday. The big news was when this studio came along, DreamWorks, SKG, Steven Spielberg, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and David Geffen came together to form this. They each put in $200 million. Paul Allen came along, and he came in with $500 million, so he owned the most, actually, but it was these 3 guys who really sort of headed the studio. But this was a very big deal. Jeffrey Katzenberg called me over to start their animation department there. I'll tell you more about that in another upcoming lecture. But this was a very big deal in Hollywood. Also, when the Arnold decided to run for governor, one of the reasons that he decided to run for governor was to keep production in California. We were finding that production was escaping to Canada like crazy. Everything was being pre-produced in the Hollywood area, but the production itself would go to Canada. Do we have any Canadians in the audience here? I guess they're so busy working on production they couldn't make it today. It was a crazy time in Hollywood because it was concerning all of us, because there were tax incentives that were going on in Vancouver that Hollywood just couldn't compete with. But then Canada ended up getting greedy. They wanted to write and produce the material as well, and they simply didn't have the talent pool for it. So my agent was jumping through hoops trying to get Ken and myself Canadian residency and become Canadian citizens so that we could work both ends of it. It was a crazy, crazy time of my life. Since then, now karma has kind of hit Vancouver. Other places have given tax incentives, and it's spread out. And now the real estate is so expensive in Vancouver that nobody can afford to live there. So things have spread out. Now Hollywood is sort of everywhere. Most of the pre-production is in Hollywood, but it has definitely spread. You can film just about anywhere now. ID, cameras. Regrets? Do I have any regrets over my career? Well, I'm a guy who doesn't want to live my life with any regrets at all. But I do kind of have one. This was at a stage in my life when I was working at Disney. I had DuckTales. We were the #1 show. I had a producer called my agent, and she called me and she said, Fred has bought the rights to a comic book, and he really wants you and Ken to turn it into a TV series for him. Will you do it? We said, well, send us material. We'll take a look at it. We looked at it. I sort of smiled and grinned. I called my agent back and said, we're very happy where we are. Tell Fred good luck with it. So my phone rings about 2 weeks later, and she said, Fred really wants you to do this. And we said, look, we read the material. It's very cute, but we've got the #1 television show. Why are we going to give that up? We're sitting pretty right now. She told us the money that he was throwing our way, and suddenly we kind of went, ka-ching, are you kidding us? We talked about it, we thought about it, but we turned it down. We said, thank you very much, but no. Another couple weeks pass, the phone rings again. My agent says, Fred really wants you to do this series, and they are willing to offer you 10% of the merchandising rights. Now, nobody in Hollywood got merchandising rights. They did this once before to a guy named George Lucas with Star Wars, and it kind of sort of made him a gazillionaire, didn't it? Well, this was unprecedented for Hollywood to offer this, and we thought 10% of merchandising rights. Still, we had the #1 show. This was a big gamble. We turned it down. What did I turn down? The head of the cover of Time magazine the following year was merchandising rights alone hit $800 million this year. I think we'd be cruising on the Royal David line right now, wouldn't we? Oh well, it's just a fortune. So I retired a few years ago, and I find myself now in stage 4 again. Who is David Wiemers? I'm thoroughly enjoying my retirement, though. I'm lecturing on cruise ships all the time. This is my 3rd year lecturing now. I'm doing 11 cruises this year. I just wish I was getting points for it all, you know? I'd be doing okay. As I started my career, I thought, I kind of want to, how do I reinvent myself now? I'm still kind of a young guy. I've got lots of life left. So I decided to take up oil painting. And I thought, I discovered I actually had a little bit of talent for it. I enjoyed working with oil colors in water, oil paint. I had worked with many, many great artists at Disney, so I kind of had these guys to fall back on and give me some tips and advice. But I found that as I was enrolling, it was my New Year's resolution in 2010. I said, I'm going to take an oil painting class this year. So I'm taking an oil painting class. I'm finding that all the other students in my class are painting just like the instructor. I had no desire to do that at all. I wanted to do my own thing. So I challenged myself and I said, you know, my success in Hollywood came through my comedy. I was a big success with comedy, but I did it with words for all of those years. I wonder if I can express myself without words now. So that was always my challenge as I set out to paint. So let me show you a few, and you tell me what you think. This is Dame Edna, one of my favorite comedians. I think Dame Edna is just terrific, and I thought, what if I was hired to do Dame Edna's official portrait, one that she wanted perfect for all of her possums? And just at that time, a hurricane blew through. So this is Hurricane Dame Edna. Here's another one. This is called Salad Daze, D-A-Z-E. As I meet a lot of people on cruise ships, it seems like the more we diet, the more weight we're gaining. Anybody else having that problem too? So there we are, we're all eating our salad, but oh, we're thinking about that next dessert, aren't we? This won first place for me at the San Diego State Fair. I was very proud of this. This is another one. This was my tribute to Fred Astaire. This is called A Stairway to Heaven. This won multiple awards for me as I submitted it into competitions as well. Love Fred Astaire. This is another one. I had a very dear friend who is deathly afraid of spiders. And she's this large woman, and I said, well, can you imagine what the spider must think of you? So this painting is called The Last Thing the Spider Ever Saw. And it's really a huge painting. This isn't, it's about half that size. It's a big, big painting. The last thing the spider ever saw. I'm very fortunate now. I've got my art in galleries around the country. I'm having one-man art shows here and there. This is one a couple years back in Laguna Beach, California. And when I'm not painting, because I don't have much time to paint these days because I'm lecturing and traveling the world so much, here I am in Moscow in 13, Greece in 14. Last year I made it to Antarctica. That little sign there says my 7th continent. I've done all 7 now. Anybody else done all 7? Yeah, a few hands. Good for you. I don't know about you, but I found it cold down there. It is cold. And this was me in Oman last year. This was so much fun. This was a resort that they came to me and they told me about it. It's called Six Senses Ziggy Bay Resort. There are 2 ways to get to this resort. It's a private resort. You can see it there, down there on the beach. You can either come in by a private boat or from the top of the mountain here where I am, and you parasail into this resort. I chose parasailing. I had the time of my life. Well, I can't do a Hollywood presentation without giving you a sneak peek at some of the future stuff, right? So here are some lectures that I've got coming up. The next one that I have, I believe, is Monday. This is going to be in the Colony Club, and this is called The Flops and the Failures. You saw some of the hit TV shows that I worked on today. I can tell you I worked on a lot of flops and failures too. I blame you for that. I worked just as hard on the flops as I did on the successes. You decided not to watch them, so you're to blame, not me. That's a fun one. So I think this will be a fun one for you too, because with every failure that you have in life, it's painful at the time, but yes, there are actually seeds of growth there too. So we'll sort of explore a lot of that. And I want to see if I can jog your memories with, oh yeah, I remember that show. Another one that I'll be giving in here in this auditorium is Adventures of the Walt Disney Company. I'll be going into more depth, giving you a lot more stories, interactions with celebrities. When I was working at Disney, I could call anybody in Hollywood and they would come work for me at the Disney studios. Why? I'll tell you later. This was the struggle years. This was what I did to make ends meet during that 6-7 year period when I was struggling in Hollywood. You'll find out how I ended up with a fight with Rocky himself, Sylvester Stallone. This is a real fun program. This is when Hollywood sails, it sells. As we're cruising back to America, we're going to look at a lot of movies that have taken place on cruise ships or on ocean liners. And we're going to explore all the difficulties that Hollywood has trying to make films at sea. Some of the stories are outrageous and tough, tough, tough. And the day before we get to Florida, we'll explore Hollywood Goes to Florida. We'll look at all the movies that have been made in Florida, the television shows. Here's the great one, Jackie Gleason himself. Remember, he was always live from Miami Beach. So that'll be our presentations. With that, I'm going to thank you. Have yourself a wonderful time, and we'll see you around the ship. Take care.